Hello and welcome to this Android event tutorial brought to you by North Border Software. This is part 4 of the series looking at how to pinch, zoom and pan in Android. And in this tutorial we're going to fix the jump in the panning which was demonstrated at the end of part 3 on the live device. First of all, I want to just explain what's actually going on there. We wrote that particular code with just one gesture in mind, just a single finger on the screen. So when we put the second finger on the screen, there's no differentiation between the first and second finger when the first finger is actually lifted. So it's almost treated as a continuation of the initial gesture. So it sees that transition between the first and second fingers as an instantaneous move, so consequently the image just jumps straight to that location. Fortunately, within the Android system we do have a mechanism really to monitor the number of gestures. So we can use indexes and pointer indexes in particular to monitor this. So a default pointer would represent the first finger on the screen, so we could choose just to monitor that particular index which identifies that particular gesture. And when a second gesture goes down, it gets a different index, so we can actually choose just to ignore that index in that particular case. Now if we lift the first finger, then we can make that second index the default index, and we can then adjust the last known location of that image to represent where the new finger is. So consequently we don't see the jump. We can calculate the difference between the first and second fingers in terms of distance, and we can just then compensate for that, and we can just carry on with the gesture until the second finger is lifted, and then that completes the move. So we need to work on that principle. Now the code in this section, to be honest, is quite complex. I've actually pulled it really directly from the Android developers website. It's their recommended way of going about resolving this particular issue. So you will get some explanation of what's actually going on. The problem is the mechanics of how this is actually working is quite difficult to understand conceptually. It's not even really explained on the Android developers website, and the reason for that is that they say, well, we'll do all the work for you in this particular code, so just go with it. So I'll explain things as much as I can, but a lot of the time it's just going to be a case of just getting the code in and just accepting it for what it is. That may not sound satisfactory, but sometimes that's just the way things are, and that's just the best thing to do, is just take the recommendations and just use the code directly. So that's what we're going to be doing. So first of all, I need to just create a few more objects. There'll be an object for the what we call an invalid pointer ID. That'll be kind of our start position. We'll set an ID of -1, which is an invalid pointer, and I'm going to set another object up for to represent our active pointer ID. Okay, so just have a close look at those. The invalid pointer ID has been set to -1. That's just a constant integer value, and I've initially set the active pointer ID to an invalid to the invalid value as well. The active pointer ID is the one that represents the finger actually on the screen, so it's the current gesture. Okay, so now I've got to actually just modify the motion event. We do need to do an AND operation now to include the motion event mask to actually derive the actual action now, because we're going to make the touch events a lot more complex. It's just one of the things we just have to do. So I'm just going to put the mask in now. So the action mask ANDed with the action will actually derive the actual action now. Okay, so the only thing I need to do for the action down is to really just save the ID of the pointer. So that's what we'll do now, modifying this code. I'll just put a note in here. Okay, so we'll set the member for active pointer ID, and we're going to get the pointer ID. So that's the only modification we need to do for this for the action down event. I'll just set this to active pointer ID. It'll be equal to the event. It'll be dot get. It'll be get pointer ID. And it's an array, so we want to get the first value in that array. So the pointer IDs are held in a pointer index array. So we'll just call off the first member of that array. Okay, so we do need to do some modifications to the move. What we need to do is find the index of the active pointer and fetch its position. So we'll just put the code in for that now. And I'll make these the first one a final integer for the pointer index. I need to invoke the find pointer index method. Okay, so that actually gets the pointer index. Now I just need to get the XY position of the gesture on the screen. And actually, I can do that just by modifying these values here. Rather than I can just now pass the pointer index in as a parameter to actually get the X and Y coordinates of that. So that'd be pointer index, and this would be pointer index as well. Okay, so I'll just put a little note in here just to explain what we're doing. So we just want to find the index of the active pointer and fetch its position. Okay, so I need to introduce some new action events now. So I want to introduce action up and action cancel. So when we invoke action up, that means all the fingers are left to screen. What I need to do is actually just reset the pointer, the active pointer, to the invalid pointer ID again. So that's our initial case anyway, where we set it to -1. So I just want to reset that scenario. So for action up and action cancel, I want to set the active pointer to the invalid pointer ID. So I'll just bring in a new set of cases for these motion events. And a very similar thing for the action cancel. I just want action cancel. I could just copy this code here. I'll just put the semicolons at the end. Okay. All right. So there's really just the one more action event to introduce, and this is the real critical one. It's the action pointer up. So what happens with action pointer up? That is the scenario where there's actually two fingers on the screen and we lift one finger. So this is where we're going to do all the compensation for the jump. So it is the critical one, and this is one that's rather complex in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So I'll just put a few notes in here as we go along. The first thing we want to do is extract the index of the pointer that left the touch sensor. But first of all, let's get the case in place for this. So it'll be a motion event, and I'm looking for it'll be action pointer up. Okay. Right, so I just put some notes in to say that we're extracting the index of the pointer that left the touch sensor or the screen. Okay, so we do this by introducing a new variable here, it'll be pointer index, and we're going to again just and the action with the motion event pointer index mask, and then we're going to do what we call a binary shift, which moves the bits one place to the right, and we're going to binary shift it with the action pointer index shift. So there's a lot going on there, and it's really just one of these elements that you just have to take for granted, really. Unless you're going to print all these indexes out to the log catalog and see exactly what's going on, it's going to be almost impossible to understand why it is the way it is. It's just the recommendations set out by the Android developers, so we're just going to take everything verbatim as they recommend it, just to get the thing to work. And the binary shift is just two chevrons. I'm looking for action pointer index shift. Okay, so I'm not going to explain any more about that particular code. What I'm going to do now is just create another integer for the pointer ID, and I'm going to invoke the getPointerID method with the event, and I'm going to pass that the pointer index to get the new pointer ID. So again, it'll be a final integer value. And just pass that pointer index. Okay, so what I need to do now, essentially, I need to identify the active pointer going up and choose the new active pointer, and I'm going to make some adjustments to that. So I need to check to see if the pointer ID if it is equivalent to the member for the active pointer ID. Just put some notes in here. So the first finger is going up essentially, so I need to choose another active pointer, and obviously what we'll do when we've got that active pointer, we'll adjust the location, the last known location on the screen to compensate for the actual jump. So I'll just type this line out, and then I'm going to use a ternary operator. I was thinking about expanding this out to make the code simpler, but I was looking on reflection, I'll just keep it as recommended in the Android developers website, really, on this subject, and we'll just have a look at what it actually means. So I need to define an integer for the new pointer index. So you may not have seen this ternary operator before, so let's have a closer look. So what I'm saying is I've defined this new integer value here, pointer index. So what I'm going to say then is if the pointer index is equivalent to 0, then I'll set the new pointer index equal to 1, else I'll set the new pointer index equal to 0. So you could have actually used an if then else statement there, but this is kind of a shorthand way of achieving the same thing. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is really just compensate for the last known location, and I'll get the x and y coordinates and I'll pass the new pointer index into those. So under here I can just type last touch x, and I'll set that equal to the event, and it'd be get x, and I'm going to pass new pointer index into there, and a similar thing for the y. Sorry, let's set one to x. Let's just set this one to y. Get x, get y, and again we'll just put the new pointer index into there. Okay, so so the next thing I need to do is just set the active pointer member to the new pointer index. That's the last little bit of code we need to do for this before we'll test it on a real device. So it'll be active pointer ID, and it'll be equivalent to the event, and it'd be get pointer ID, and again just going to set this to new pointer ID. So all I'm doing is actually compensating for the distance between the first and second fingers now. Okay, so it's quite complex there in terms of code, so I think approximately we just need to understand the philosophy really of just having a different index for each of the gestures, and then obviously the current one on the screen is default index, and then if we lift that finger off and we still have a second finger on the screen, which we detect with the action pointer up, then we'll make the index of that gesture the current one, and will compensate for the difference, the distance between the two fingers, and we'll adjust the last known location accordingly. So we'll compensate for the jump. So what I'll do now, I'm just going to retest this now on a real device. Okay, so got the app loaded. So let's just get an image. I'll just go for the camera again, and we'll pick the let's go for image in Brighton this time. Okay, so now I'm just using a single finger to pan the image. Now I've got the second finger on the screen, and I've lifted the first finger, and you can see that's not jumped, and I can just carry on with the pan gesture. So that's that problem fixed, and that's essentially all we need to do for the panning side of things. In the next tutorial we'll go on and look at the pinch zoom. Alright, so I hope you found this one useful. Catch you in the next one. Bye for now. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you find this tutorial useful. All the project files and source code are available for download on my website. Thank you.